I have this thing about going through and preparing, and then partway through, I almost always just dump everything I've done and start over again. Unfortunately, I did that pretty late in the game this time. And so I wanted to bring so much to this story to give you all the things you need to see the glory that's in the story. The story of Ruth is, on some counts, romantic. It's definitely a love story, and it's a story of some just very amazing things and the full scope of things. It happens, it is set during the time of the judges, but it's not included in the judges. It's set apart where the judges, if you'll remember, is a time when in chapter 17 of Judges, verse 6, it says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Every eyes. And so the story in many ways doesn't belong here. Part of it is it doesn't even occur in Israel at the beginning. The story opens with Elimelech taking his family and going to Moab. There's a famine in the land, so he's looking for food for his family. And going to Moab isn't necessarily a terrible thing that he's doing here, but he's taking his two sons with him, who are going to be of marriage age as they are there in Moab. And before anything happens, Elimelech dies. So we have our main character here is cut off. And we have Naomi with the two sons left. Sorry, I'm losing my words tonight, but thankfully I will get through this. The two sons get wives from Moab. Now, there's no, There's no command in scripture that says, don't marry a Moabite wife. You're not to marry the Canaanites in the country. But Moabites, it doesn't say you can't marry a Moabite, but if you do, you end up with Moses having a curse on the Moabites that will follow them for 10 generations. So if you are a Moabite, the son of a Moabite, you are excluded from the assembly of God. You cannot be part of that special thing, that coming together before God. And this is a very interesting thing here with Ruth. And she is one of the Moabite women. Orpah is the other. They marry the two sons, and the two sons die. And so then here Ruth is alone without anyone to care for her, and she latches on to Naomi. And here you have to understand, the Moabites are not necessarily somebody that you would look up to. They are a country that was begun by the incestuous relationship between Lot and his oldest daughter. So we have just a really kind of icky kind of background that she is from. And she has no experience except with this family of the God of Abraham. She has the experience just that she sees with Naomi. Now, I can't imagine that she gets a lot from Elimelech before he's gone. And I really don't think that his sons have been terribly instructive, but somehow she is attached to Naomi. And Naomi, at this point, you'll see in the first chapters, she wants to be renamed Mara, bitter. And if you've ever been around somebody who is very bitter, it is not somebody that you cling to. It's really somebody that is almost repellent. Usually you don't really want a relationship because everything that they see and feel is very negative. And all that Naomi sees at this point is all she has lost. She went out full and she's coming back empty. And so here we have this introduction to Ruth, who is clinging to this woman and to her God in spite of this bitterness that she sees in Naomi. It's got to say a lot as you read and see Ruth and her relationship to her mother-in-law. I come from a family where the relationship between the sister-in-laws of my mother were very, very difficult. And so many things happened that just caused a lot of wreckage in our family. And to see Ruth, it's just such an amazing story to see someone who is willing to cling to a mother-in-law, to give up her own family, to see that there is faith here in spite of Naomi, in spite of where she's at. And so we have Ruth coming into this story and being a very different kind of Moabite than we would expect. Orpah doesn't choose to cling, even though she starts to. But you'll see, it's Naomi and Ruth who have this clinging relationship on Ruth's part. Now, Naomi keeps saying, oh, go back, I'm nothing. I can't have another son for you. And at that point, you need to understand that, of course, it's ridiculous for Naomi to have another son, as if she could have a marriageable yard and could wait for him to grow up. And it doesn't make any sense. But within the plan of God for women who lost their husband, the brother was expected to marry that. If he was already married, he was to marry the widow and bring up a child, a son that would take place. So you need to understand that in Israel, that the land was given, allotted to the different families, and that remained in the family forever. And that was their land. But in the process of different things happening where they would have economic disaster, that family had the option to sell. But it's not the selling of land the way that we would sell it. It is the person buying the land up to the point of the Sabbath year. And on the Sabbath year then, so you count backwards. So here, say it's 6 years till the Sabbath when you buy the land. You're essentially leasing it for 6 years because at the end of the Sabbath, that land goes back into the family. Well, if a widow has no one to marry her to raise up a child to take that land, then the family land is lost to them. So it's very important here for her to find someone who is going to be able to redeem that land. And so enter Boaz. And I'm always amazed when I read through the book who Boaz is. Keep looking back to what the land was like. The people did what was right in their own eyes. And then look at Boaz. Look at Boaz, the man he is, the person he is, and how far removed it is from the people of the judges. And you have the judges, of course, refers to the judge who would come and rescue the people. So the people would be worshiping idols, would be turning away from God. God would bring judgment, and the people would cry out to God for help, and a judge would come in and rescue them. As they rescue people, then everybody, of course, is, oh, God is wonderful. He's rescued us, and everything's great. And then people start to see what's right in their own eyes, and they go back into, and so it's this really depressing cycle. I've been in 2 studies now that cover Joshua, and they've gone to Ruth instead of doing Judges. I've always wondered why. But if you've read part of it, you've read it all. And it's a sad time. And so you've got Boaz then here. And the thing that just has amazed me, I never realized who Boaz was. You look back, and it says in the genealogy in Matthew that Boaz was born to Solomon. I should turn to it just because I switched Bibles out too tonight. I didn't know if I'm going to change everything. I might as well bring my own Bibles. So here we have in chapter 1 of Matthew, the genealogy of Jesus. And it says in verse 5, and Solomon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. Boaz is Rahab's son. And Rahab is the prostitute, that he would have a mother who would prepare him to look at Ruth in a very different way than others would look at her. Now, to be clear, when you go through genealogies, there's sometimes they, the word truncate, they take out some sections. So there's a possibility that it's his grandmother, even his great-grandmother. She's in the line. And can you imagine the stories that she would tell? I think of the walls of Jericho coming down. And here, she lives in the wall. Her house is part of the wall. And she has promised she's going to stay there in the wall. If you've ever experienced an earthquake, and then where there's stone, when you have the earthquake, you hear the stone rapping, and then the crumbling, and imagine the walls coming down, except for this little section that has scarlet. That story is Boaz's legacy. He has a woman of faith. And so we look at Ruth as this woman of faith. You know what I didn't do? I didn't start my timer. Oh, well. Wave at me when time's up. So, the thing in Ruth, there's a couple of things that I think are important, besides knowing who Boaz is and who Ruth is. The whole idea of redemption. He is called a kinsman redeemer. Now, I said something about, if a woman lost her husband, the nearest person was able to redeem her. It was in the sense of redeeming the land and bringing it back in, because Israel was never supposed to be, lots of landowners out there. It was supposed to be families. It was family oriented, and everybody had their allotment. So in redeeming it, it's a lot about the land, but it's also throughout Scripture, redemption has many other ways of looking at it. We have the redemption in Exodus, where the people are redeemed from slavery. And it's a picture of us being redeemed from the slavery of sin. We have in the Psalms that the idea of being redeemed from a pit and understanding that pit of our own making, pit of our own sin, our own decisions, being redeemed from that. And here, Ruth is being redeemed in a very real sense as well. She is going to be brought into the family of God. She's going to be taken from being a Moabite on the outside and being brought in. And you know, in Deuteronomy, let's see if I can find the passage here. I'm not seeing it. In Deuteronomy, it says basically that you end up, anyone who is the son of a Moabite is not with, I think I already said this, that they're not allowed to be within the assembly for the 10th generation. Look at Ruth. When you look at the end of the book, sorry, little spoiler here, but when you look at the end of the book, you see her son is called Obed. Obed has Jesse, and Jesse has David, a man after God's own heart. And you know, the law says excluded. God says mine, a man after my own heart. This is a gem right in the middle of the Old Testament. It is full of the grace of God. It is full of God saying yes to people who are marginalized, who are on the outside, people who have no good background, nobody in their line they can go back and say, well, I'm so-and-so's child. These are people on the outside. And when you, if you're like me, feel like you just have blown it in a lot of ways. And to know, and no matter at what point I have blown it, God has always said, you're mine. By the grace, through Jesus, through his death on the cross, you are redeemed. You are mine. And I hope that as you go through, that you are going to come to that, the joy and the amazing story. I mean, it's just a wonderful story. It's not all candlelight and flowers. It's threshing floor and what's the word? Uncovered feet. It's a very different kind of romance. But it's still